The first place where Lehi's party landed was called by them the land of first inheritance. There's no mention of cold or ice or snow, so it looks as if they're in the tropics or semi-tropics anyway.
A lot of people are under the impression that there weren't other people here except Lehi and his family, and that's not true. There were already existing cultures here in Mesoamerica.
We tend to have this conception that when Lehi and his family got here, that it was this open, empty land. But when we read the text of the Book of Mormon itself, it becomes apparent that there were other people here. And Lehi and his party discovered that fairly quickly.
After their arduous journey across the bleak Arabian desert and the soul-searching ocean crossing to the New World, Lehi's faithful son Nephi led the righteous members of the family in establishing a covenant people in what a growing scholarly consensus believes is the most likely location, Mesoamerica, the region of southern Mexico and Guatemala. Lehi's family quickly discovered, like the ancient Israelites entering Canaan, that thriving cultures were already there, cultures that had very different religious beliefs. Their challenge, not unlike our own, was that of keeping their covenants with God while living in the midst of a world continually tempting them to do otherwise.
In 600 BC, we have people living in the region.
They encountered other peoples and began to integrate to one degree or another over time with these different groups.
By the 6th century BC in Mesoamerica, we already had full and well-established cultural development.
They found a complex civilization that was already on a trajectory towards what would later flourish as the Maya civilization and other later cultures.
And in 1830, Joseph Smith could not have known about these cultures from contemporary sources.
The last time I counted, there were something like 65 different guesses or hypotheses as to where Lehi's party landed on the west coast of America. And that's all right to have guessed, but that does not make good, scholarly, believable progress. We've learned that we must be exhaustive. That is, look at all the references, take in every bit of information.
See if there is a place where both the cultural patterns and the geographical patterns fit.
So far, based on what we have found, Mesoamerica is the leading candidate for Book of Mormon lands.
The vast majority of the Book of Mormon took place in the New World, and all the evidence suggests that it took place in Mesoamerica.
First step in looking at Book of Mormon geography, obviously, is to start with the text, because the Book of Mormon is the authority on what the Book of Mormon says.
Work out an internal geography from the Book of Mormon itself, and then try to find a location that fits that geography.
When we look at all of the geographical statements and compare them and systematize our knowledge of them, it turns out that there is a single consistent picture that comes forth. The immediate promised land was shaped something like an hourglass.
We know that there is a land northward and a land southward, and between the two is a relatively narrow neck of land.
It was a sizable land, but the question of how big it is crucial to our understanding more about it. The only real tool we have to determine area or dimensions is the travel time for their journeys. On average, most groups in any part of the world are traveling at a rate that goes about 15 miles a day.
Traveling from the land of Nephi to the land of Zarahemla, they say it was about 21 days. For a group of say, 200 or 300 people with flocks and herds, it would, you can figure it'd be about 200 miles, probably no more than that.
And a few hundred miles, a couple of hundred, to the narrow neck of land.
It would be somewhere roughly 600 to 1,000 miles from top to bottom.
And not likely more than 200 miles wide. Maybe a little more, but not enough to change the picture very much.
Flocks and herds, it would, you can figure it'd be about 200 miles, probably no more than that.
And a few hundred miles, a couple of hundred, to the narrow neck of land.
It would be somewhere roughly 600 to 1,000 miles from top to bottom.
And not likely more than 200 miles wide. Maybe a little more, but not enough to change the picture very much.
The distance across the narrow neck of land is kind of hard to estimate because we have two distances for it in the Book of Mormon, both of which are given in time rather than in distance. It's a day's journey for a Nephite in one section, and there's a day and a half. In both of those cases, there's a fortified line. Both of them appear to be in the context of military. And when military couriers are running, they're going faster than a normal population is going to travel.
Couriers who are runners could traverse that in a day or day and a half. But we don't run a day like they did anciently.
There's one other feature at the neck that deserves a mention. It's quite a crucial thing. They called it the narrow pass. This is not merely the narrow neck, it's in the narrow neck.
There's a narrow passage area on the narrow neck of land somewhere that was very strategic in terms of north-south travel.
That has to be narrow enough that a defending army could prevent a group of people moving through it.
The Nephite army at one point knew that they could intercept a party of refugees that were going northward. No other place to go except that pass. And they intercepted the refugees. The land northward and the land southward are the two major land features that are mentioned, and they're mentioned at least 75 times each.
Land southward, nearly surrounded by water. Land northward, unbounded on the northern end, which extends into unknown territory.
It's northward and southward. It's not the land south nor the land north. So that implies that there's a little something off to one side or the other. There's one river that's mentioned by name in the whole record, and that's the River Sidon. And the Sidon is central to the land of Zarahemla.
We know that the river is flowing in a northward direction. If it's a river, we know that there's a valley. If it's a valley, we know that there's some mountains on either side.
The two major candidates for the River Sidon are the Grijalva River in Chiapas and the Usumacinta River that drains the Guatemalan highlands, both emptying into the Gulf of Mexico.
The Book of Mormon has many of the same cultural characteristics, all the important characteristics of Mesoamerican civilization.
As interesting as it is to talk about the geography and the architecture of Mesoamerican, comparing it to the Book of Mormon, there's a much deeper and richer body of data that we can look at when it comes to Mesoamerican belief and Mesoamerican religion as compared to the Book of Mormon.
There are a number of cultural features from the Book of Mormon that fit the Mesoamerican context.
One of the very important things about the Book of Mormon is how well the Book of Mormon parallels what we know of the social cultural pressures that are happening in Mesoamerica.
So if you add those cultural features to the geographical features, it makes it the most likely candidate.
The Mesoamerican cultural development coincides chronologically with the dates of the events that the Book of Mormon describes.
It's striking to me that the Book of Mormon tells about basically two civilizations. First, the Jaredites, and then that of the Nephites, Lamanites, and Mulekites. As you go into the land northward, which the Nephites call the land of desolation, that's where the Jaredites had lived.
So wherever we're looking for the Jaredites, it's got to be north of a narrow neck of land. And that correlates very nicely with Mesoamerica.
The time period and the location for the Olmec and the Jaredites fit very nicely together.
The rise of the highland and lowland Maya civilization occurred at the same time as the rise of the Nephite and Lamanite civilizations.
The late pre-classic starts on the order of 500 or 400 BC and runs on to about 300 or 400 AD. The land where the Nephites lived and where the Lamanites lived was a land with cities, even great cities.
Such as the city of Nephi, the city of Zarahemla, the city of Bountiful, and many minor cities. At the time of the Book of Mormon, we have some major cities that were flourishing in Mesoamerica. We have the pre-classic site of El Mirador, which was a major city, and we have some of the cities that are more familiar to people, such as Palenque, Tikal, which were beginning to flourish.
So cities there were, and there had to be a corresponding population.
Probably the greatest city in Mesoamerica that's widely recognized is Teotihuacan in Central Highland, Mexico.
Teotihuacan is a city that gets its start basically about 150 before Christ, and it rises in population till about 650 after Christ, at which time it's the sixth largest city in the entire world.
Archaeological investigations there have placed the rise of that city at, interestingly, the time when Nephite migrations were coming out of the land southward in the middle of the 1st century BC.
The Nephites, as long as they were contemporary with Teotihuacan, they would definitely have known about each other.
The Nephites must have known about the Teotihuacanos because they were sort of in the middle between Teotihuacan and the major lowland Maya area.
Certainly in Mesoamerica, we have lots and lots of cities that were built of stone, that were built of cement.
I think that one of the most fascinating things about Teotihuacan is that they were very well versed in the use of concrete mixed with cement.
All the buildings in Teotihuacan were covered with a thick coat of concrete that we call Teotihuacano concrete, which is the equivalent to modern concrete.
It's a city of cement.
When there are so many people involved in such social entities of such scale as the cities, there had to have been a fairly strong government, and all the ancient civilizations were governed by kings.
The Book of Mormon peoples would have had to have operated in a culturally complex situation.
The political organization of Mesoamerica, particularly of the Maya, where we know it the best, and of what we see in the Book of Mormon, particularly for the Lamanites, have some interesting correlations. Not only do they have kings, not only do they have dynasties where there is an inheritance of the kingship, but what you find is a very loose conglomeration of different cities each of which has their own king, but appear to be beholding to an over-king. So we have Lamoni, who is beholding to his father, who is a king of kings. That is exactly the situation that we find in Mesoamerica. One of the things that happens in Maya political organizations is they would have a state visit, a very formal visit from one king to another. And it appears when we have Lamoni, who is supposed to show up for his father's birthday party, that we have a state visit. And when he's going to take Ammon to release his brethren, we have another very formal state visit. And it appears that these state visits that we have in the Book of Mormon are very much parallel to the texts that we have that indicate these types of state visits among the Maya. When Nephi and his family separate from his brothers, they go up over the mountains and come into highland Guatemala, where they found the city of Nephi.
This is up in the mountain somewhere because it's always up to Nephi.
Best candidate for the city of Nephi would probably be in the area of Kaminalhuyu. The Book of Mormon never specifically tells us that they joined with other peoples, but everything that the Book of Mormon tells us indicates that they had to have joined with other peoples.
Kaminalhuyu was, in fact, the seedbed of civilization in southern Mesoamerica. And that is the picture we get for the city of Nephi in many ways.
Within a relatively short period of time, the descriptions that we're hearing about the city of Nephi indicates that there were a large number of people there. So this is a remarkable accomplishment in a very short period of time for someone to not only be able to gather large numbers of people together, but to coordinate them, to get them to live in the same area, to get them to have the same basic beliefs, to get them to have the same economic system, to get them working together rather than working separately. And Nephi is able to do that, pull them together.
There has to be somebody pushing it, leading it. Nephi was such a leader.
At the same time period as Nephi, the site of Kaminalhuyu is governed by innovative leadership that is managing a complex system of canals and water purification projects and a massive building project.
We know that there are people that are producing pottery, building structures of dirt, basically filling the whole place with a new culture.
The sudden development is what I would expect of an immigrant party with a high level of skill, technologically, but maybe more intellectually and culturally, being inserted into a place and building in a new environment, a new manifestation of civilization.
The influence of who dominates whom, the small arriving culture or the existing culture, is the one with more success. Who has more success in technological matters, in agricultural matters, and in constructing buildings?
Nephi builds a city. Nephi is a builder. His people acclaim him as a king. He has striking leadership abilities. He's resourceful.
He's got all of these skills and talents and abilities. He's a can-do kind of guy, and who is absolutely committed to the Lord.
People want to follow someone who's righteous. They may not even be righteous themselves, but they appreciate integrity. They appreciate being able to trust someone and to follow them. And I think that's Nephi.
His name, like the name of Caesar, was conferred as a title on those who succeeded him.
I think it's not chance that it's through his line that the kings come. It's his line that become the keepers of the plates.
And so we just see this incredible prophet, leader, colonizer, builder, and he's irresistible.
Later on, around 200 BC, there's an archaeological manifestation of reduced population. To me, that signals the period when Mosiah took those who followed him and believed in him and left that area and went to Zarahemla, where they discovered the people of Zarahemla, or the Amalekites.
Once Mosiah leaves, the city of Nephi becomes Lamanite territory.
During the time of the Book of Mormon, there were multiple languages spoken.
In addition to multiple languages, there were, throughout Mesoamerica, a surprising number of ways of writing.
There are increasing numbers of examples of Maya writing in the pre-classic, that is, before the time of Christ, in the Maya area. Probably the most famous one is that of Monument 10 from Kaminahuyu.
They had just about any kind of book you could think of.
Those books were known as codexes, and a few of them still exist.
The ability to write was extremely widespread in Mesoamerica.
The spoken language, I think, could very well have been changed. It might have still had its basic Hebrew core, as English does. I mean, if we try to read Beowulf, we can't do it because the language has changed so much.
I find Amaron's words to Mormon, who was 10 years old at the time, to be interesting. Amaron tells him, "I perceive that thou art quick to observe." The way I read that is that Amaron is telling Mormon, I see that you're a fast learner, and that's good because you're going to have lots of stacks of plates in a couple of different languages and several dialects of the languages and in different stages of change of these languages. Good luck.
There is one point, however, that's important to recognize, and that is that religious language tends to be highly conservative and preserved.
Moroni comments about how the characters have changed and how the language has changed.
Nephi at the beginning of the history of the Book of Mormon and Moroni at the end of the history of the Book of Mormon, about 1,000 years apart, would not be able to understand each other.
Mormon would probably not have been speaking the same language as Nephi, but he has been instructed in the language and is still able to communicate in it after a fashion.
One of the most fascinating questions about Lehi and his family coming to the New World is how the transfer of culture is going to happen. What's the direction? And for things that have to do with everyday life, the direction has to be from Mesoamerica into their lives.
They arrive in this new environment where they're surrounded by people who are not like them in any way, linguistically, religiously, culturally. And the challenge is to integrate into that new environment while preserving what it is that's distinctive about you, the really important thing about you.
Para conservar. They try to maintain their principles and their norms and laws because the whole cultural development was surely the opposite to theirs, or at least very different.
And the challenge for them is to hold on to what they know, is divinely handed to them, divinely given to them.
Under Israelite law, the Nephites would have been prohibited, if they are righteous, from intermarrying with any of these people.
Laman probably, having no reason to obey the covenant, he wasn't committed to it. Didn't bother him to intermarry with the natives or have his children do it, or to go after their gods, whatever. Laman very quickly solidified himself in with the people who were already there.
There is an indication that people joined them, and the first incident that's told about in historical terms, as in the book of Jacob, where Sherem, an antichrist, came seeking out Jacob and said, Brother Jacob, I've been trying to see you.
And so he comes in as an outsider. He's learned the language. He's learned something of the religion. He has his own sort of religious proposal that he wants to put forward and have accepted. And Jacob indicates to him that he has not understood the religion as well as he thought he did.
Those people probably carried different traditions, different languages certainly, and different ideas that were at variance with what the prophets were trying to teach the Nephites.
Nephi includes all of these passages in Isaiah, and Jacob does too, to explain how people who are not part of the covenant can be adopted into the covenant. Those are big issues in Nephi's time and Jacob's time. After that, there's not a problem, and is never really brought up again because they figured out how to handle all of the others that they're running into and how they can fit into the covenant. And soon they're making a distinction between the Nephites, those who accept the covenant, And the Lamanites are all those who don't accept the covenant. So it's not just the blood lineage of Laman and Lemuel and the sons of Ishmael. It is anyone who isn't part of the Nephites.
It's really more of a cultural identity than it is a physical or biological identity.
That widens the scope to any of the indigenous people who are not brought into the covenant.
More than Lehi's family preserving the scriptures in the form of the brass plates, the scriptures preserved them.
What they had to do is continually return back to the plates of brass, continually return back to their own religious sensibilities to survive in this kind of society.
The brass plates were immensely important, crucially important. We know what happened to the Mulekites, who brought nothing with them, no scriptures with them. They lost their language, they lost their identity in a sense, they lost their memory of who they were, and they lost their religion.
These brass plates play the same role in their society that scriptures play in our society. That is, they enlarge our memory. They remind us of God's dealings with his children in the past.
And with that, there is a reminder that even in a new world and a new environment, the God of Israel is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And his spirit is the same yesterday, today, and forever.
It's surprising how the people in the New World, how Lehi's family lived the law of Moses in its purity, knowing why it was given. They look forward to Christ. They look forward to a Messiah who is named for them in the early pages of the Book of Mormon.
All through the Book of Mormon, beginning with the first generation, there is the overlay of the promise of Christ.
Lehi had a clearer notion, because of revelation that had been given to him specifically, about the coming of a Messiah. And so the Lehites, the Nephites, understand better than the Israelites did in the Old Testament as we have it, that the law of Moses was not an end in itself, but a pointer to something else, that the sacrifices pointed to a great sacrifice yet to come. They saw the law of Moses as something in need of fulfillment, not something they were to keep until the end of time. When Nephi arrives in the New World, one of the things he does is to build a temple. That's, again, a tangible symbol of the presence of God in the community.
That Nephi built a temple wasn't necessarily out of place in Mesoamerica. The temple actually was the center of worship for Mesoamerican people, and rituals would take place there.
The pyramids that are found in Mesoamerica are not temples. They are, in fact, symbolic mountains. The word for mountain in Maya is Weets, and oftentimes the pyramids themselves have as their proper name Weets as well. It is, in fact, the temple structures on the top of the pyramid that constitute the temple itself. Mountains were considered sacred. For example, in the area around Lake Atitlan, there are 3 volcanoes which were considered to be sacred. In ancient tradition, they are connected to the creation of the earth by rising out of the primordial sea. Caves and mountains were believed to be the most sacred places, like the Holy of Holies. A Maya pyramid would have been an artificial recreation of the mountain, and the sacred rooms on top would represent the caves. Caves were seen as portals to the supernatural world, particularly the underworld.
The Maya had a 3-tiered conception of the universe. They had the sky above, they had the surface of the earth, and then a watery underworld. And we see this exact same concept being taught in the Book of Mormon. When Abinadi was preaching in front of the priests of King Noah, in Mosiah 13:12, he says, "Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of things which are in the heaven above, or which are in the earth beneath, or which are in the water under the earth." And that's just exactly the concept of the 3-tiered Maya cosmos.
Although it isn't clear exactly what went on at each of these levels, or how one achieved one of these levels. The ultimate goal of the Maya, and certainly the Maya kings, was to go to the highest level of the cosmos and end up in the sky.
To be a Maya king was to progress from being a young person with a child name to coronation, where they often received a new name from an important ancestor or god to eventually become a god themselves.
An example of temple worship in the time before Christ in Mesoamerica can be seen in the triadic architecture in the Mayan area, where you have 3 temples. We don't know exactly what was done in these temples, but a recent find in Guatemala from a period before the time of Christ does have murals relating to creation themes. Many of the ideas and symbols that we see in these later cultures from around the time of the Nephites were derived from an earlier culture on the Olmec horizon, and they would have had these beliefs and ideas and the symbols that express them.
The straightest line for a person to follow in antiquity, from conversion to covenant abiding, is through the temple.
The temples are as important to them as they were to Solomon when he built his temple. Their first temple in the land of Nephi was patterned after Solomon's temple.
If you're bringing people into the covenant, the thing you do is build a temple, and then you bring them to the temple. And that's the thing which adheres them to all of the new principles and teachings and covenants which they received.
Although the temple was a center of focus for both Mesoamericans and the Nephite people, it was the covenants that the Nephites were making at those temples that really set them apart from the Lamanites and from the larger Mesoamerican cultures.
One of the most striking features of Mesoamerican culture at all times, at all ages, was the degree of concentration on religious or sacred matters.
El caso de la ciudadela, en donde está rodeado por una muralla y tiene.
In the case of this city, surrounded by a wall with exactly 12 pyramidal platforms in the plaza, and 3 main ones towards the east, the most important side of the complex, the symbolism is very clear to many members of the church.
Strong religious symbolism in Mesoamerica centers on the theme of resurrection.
The Mayan maize god was the chief deity who is a dying and resurrecting god, and oftentimes you see him emerging from the earth, and the earth is portrayed in Maya as a turtle, so he's coming forth out of this cracked crevice of the turtle as he's being resurrected.
Although the Mayan resurrection story is in many ways very different from Mormon belief, the idea that a god had to die and be sacrificed and then resurrected to save the world or bring the world into existence shows certain very similar parallels to one another.
So what we see in both the ancient Maya civilization and in the Book of Mormon is the central religious theme of a dying and resurrecting God.
We have in the Book of Mormon several references to the people becoming idolatrous.
There are several times in the Book of Mormon when they're cautioned against worshiping graven images. We find that in Mosiah 12 and 13. It's also in Alma. And when we look at that through the lens of Mesoamerican religions, it seems to make a lot more sense.
In Alma chapter 5, there's this magnificent discourse that talks about spiritual rebirth. Have you received the image of Jesus Christ in your countenance?
We have in Mesoamerica a glyphic phrase that basically talks about receiving the image of a certain god in your countenance, and it ties in with a deity impersonation ritual that was typically done by kings or other high elites, where they would wear this graven mask and literally transform into a certain god. And I think Alma was speaking against that when he asked, have you received his image in your countenances, meaning the image of Christ. And rather than telling his people to impersonate certain other gods, that they needed to be Christ-like.
When Benjamin begins his speech, one of the things that he tells the people very specifically is he says, I am a man. That's a rather strange thing.
I think King Benjamin was actually responding to this concept of divine kingship, and he wanted to let his people know that he wasn't a divine king.
Maya kings were considered to be divine. So one of the things that Benjamin wants to make sure that his people understand is that they know that he is a man.
He's reinforcing his humanity to his people because he doesn't want them to buy into this divine king concept that is surrounding them in the Mesoamerican area.
This happens again when Ammon is asked by Lamoni, are you more than a man? And one of the conversations, one of the critical issues that they have is, are you more than a man? Mesoamerican deities have a class of deities which are gods who have come to the earth, and very clearly they're thinking that this is what this man is.
The Maya kings had a practice of bloodletting, taking their own blood for ritual sacrifice on behalf of the people.
This is a practice that the Maya kings and queens, because the women did it also, take on in order to show that they are of the divine line of rulership.
The higher the level of the ruler or his social level, the blood offering was that much more important.
As far as we know, in almost the totality of Mesoamerican cultural development, human sacrifice is very much present, and social norms are very different from those that Lehi's family or other prophets practiced, and surely they had many problems being able to maintain their principles and laws.
Mesoamerica believed that heart sacrifice and human sacrifice and bloodletting was important to keep their lives going, to keep their gods satisfied.
The bloodletting of the ruler was basically an offering so that the gods would favor the Mayans and purify the place and give fertility and be able to communicate with the gods.
Their gods have given them life, and they need to give something back to keep life as they know it going. And what's better than the life gods gave you? And so they used human sacrifice, especially heart sacrifice, the taking of the beating heart.
Helaman's letter to General Moroni, where he indicates the troubles that they're going through as the Lamanites have captured some of their cities. And he says that they have taken many captives, and they've killed them all except for the chief captains, who they've saved alive for some reason. He says, but as far as we know, they're either in the land of Nephi or slain.
These people are very intelligent, they're very advanced societies, and they realize that the heart is the motor of the body. And so they're interested in removing the heart and offering it up while it's still beating to the gods as the supreme offering.
In terms of Mesoamerica, this is very interesting because it was the chief captains that you really wanted to capture, because those were the high prestige ones.
So you need people who have some type of virtue. It may be chastity. It may be the purity and innocence of young children. It may be the strength of warriors.
The chief captains were the ones you wanted to sacrifice.
Amulek is obviously familiar with the practice of bloodletting that's being performed by the kings in the area. We find this reflected in the Book of Mormon in Alma 34:10, where it says, "For it is expedient that there should be a great and a last sacrifice, yea, not the sacrifice of a man, neither of beast, neither of any manner of fowl, for it shall not be a human sacrifice, but it must be an infinite and eternal sacrifice." Amulek is essentially denying the divinity of these kings when he says that it is not a human sacrifice that's going to atone for the sins of the people, but it needs to be a divine sacrifice. It needs to be the blood of a god. and he's specifically referring to the blood of Christ.
It's very difficult for the Mesoamerican people to let go of their old habits because they feel that the gods will no longer be pleased with them.
There is clearly a parallel interest in the heart and metaphors of the heart between the Book of Mormon and Mesoamerica.
It's very hard to keep your ideas pure when you're the minority. And this is what Lehi and his family would have been up against.
The law of Moses was done away. The new sacrifice that was necessary is the broken heart and a contrite spirit, literally a heart sacrifice.
The Book of Mormon begins with a scene of war and ends with a scene of war. The first is the destruction of the city of Jerusalem by the Babylonians, and then at the end, the destruction of the Nephites by the Lamanites. So the entire narrative is framed by warfare.
In the field of archaeology, and there was a uniform assurance by all the archaeologists that there was no war in Mesoamerica. There was war.
Once we get much better documentation, we see that the whole society is structured and organized and focused on military activities.
It was a highly militarized society.
It's an integral part of their religion, of their political structure, of their economies. Plunder from war plays a vital economic role for their societies.
And every year, it seems, we get more and more information about the importance of war, about how general war was, which, of course, is what the Book of Mormon says.
All ancient warfare was fundamentally a religious act, that war was engaged in order to fulfill the will of the gods. It's certainly reflected in Mesoamerican terms and also in the Book of Mormon.
I don't know of any ancient general that would go to battle without consulting the gods in one way or another.
The Book of Mormon clearly reflects holy war in a number of different ways. First of all, the role of prophets in warfare in the Book of Mormon is quite explicit.
The Nephite soldiers come and consult Alma to get his prophetic guidance on how the battle should be fought.
And that's closely paralleled with both Near Eastern and Mesoamerican practices.
The kinds of descriptions of warfare that are given in the Book of Mormon fit very well in Mesoamerica.
Book of Mormon describes several kinds of fortifications. Perhaps the best known are those that were constructed during the time of General Moroni and are discussed in the Book of Alma.
If you have level terrain, you dig a trench in that terrain and take that earth and pile it up on the other side, and that creates a trench and then a mound, and then on top of the mound you build a palisade, a wooden work, some type of defense there, so that an attacker has to go through the trench, up a mound, and then face the wall.
The site of Aguateca is one which has an escarpment to the east and a deep natural chasm to the west, which forms a very natural defensive barrier, and from which defenders could hurl rocks and spears and other weapons against anyone who attempted to attack it. In order to get up to the fortified area of the site, you would have had to have gone through this very narrow chasm, where it would have been very easy to pick off attackers. Other Maya cities such as El Mirador, Tikal, Tintal, and Becan all have fortifications in the form of ditches, moats, palisades, so that we know that fortified sites were not unusual in Mesoamerica in a manner similar to those described in the Book of Mormon.
In agricultural societies, there are certain times of the year where you have to plant and you have to harvest crops. And this is very important because if you don't take advantage of that time of the year, you're going to run into trouble.
Warfare in the Book of Mormon, for example, is almost always conducted in the 2nd or the 11th months of the year.
If your populace was under arms constantly, that meant your crop didn't get sown properly, and that meant starvation for the population as a whole. So warfare often brought with it famine in its wake.
And interestingly, it is precisely in Mesoamerica where the 2nd and the 11th months are the months where farmers would have the time and the climate would be right to allow for warfare to occur.
The sacred calendar governs all of life, and that includes kings and peasants.
Ancient societies were closely aligned with their calendars in terms of establishing their holy days.
We read in the text of this extraordinarily bold stroke of Tiankin to sneak inside of the Lamanite army's camp and to kill the king on New Year's Day.
Malachi's forces are trying to get into the land northward, and Tiankham's forces stop them. We know that Tiankham's forces were kind of an elite, ancient equivalent of a Green Beret.
The king was expected on New Year's Day to perform certain rituals that essentially became a secondary coronation. And when the king is killed on the day before that secondary coronation, the entire religious and political structure is thrown into disarray and chaos and confusion, allowing then a counterattack at that moment to be doubly effective.
It would have been terribly disconcerting for an ancient people to wake up on New Year's Day and find that their king had been killed somehow during the night. This would have been a terrible psychological shock, not merely the killing of the king, but at that season of the year. This means things have gone terribly wrong. The cosmos is out of kilter.
For the king to die on the day when he should have been celebrated would have left the Lamanite soldiers not only leaderless in a military sense, but certainly feeling that the signs of heaven were against them.
The people in the king's camp are overcome by the heat and the labors and the fatigue of the day. And yet it's New Year's, which tells you something. If the heat of the day did them in, at New Year's time, we're not talking about upstate New York, or we're not talking about our normal calendar. Probably both. We're probably talking about a place that's very different from the area that Joseph Smith knew, and a calendar that's different from our calendar, because New Year's Day is hot. It's so hot that it leaves people just drained of energy and exhausted in their camp.
Now, for Joseph Smith to build the story of Tiankham into his narrative and make it true to what we now know of ancient societies in America is extraordinary. I mean, what person living in upstate New York has figured this out? Nobody. No one has figured this out.
Mesoamericans were quite clever in developing a wide array of different types of weapons.
Obsidian is a volcanic glass that has extremely sharp edges and sometimes is as sharp as a scalpel.
From the artistic and archaeological evidence of the New World, we can tell that the swords were probably what are known as the macuidal among the Aztecs. This is a wooden blade, and embedded in that blade are pieces of obsidian, which form a very deadly cutting edge.
They were so sharp that there are accounts of them actually taking off the head of a horse with a single blow.
So these were very effective and deadly weapons, and were used probably because as the Nephites lost access to certain metal resources, they were unable to transmit and replicate their metal technologies.
We don't know exactly what kind of sword Ammon had, but the kind of sword that the Mesoamericans used certainly would have been sufficient to cut off the arms of the attackers, and those arms were subsequently taken and presented to King Lamoni. In warfare, the wood would have readily become stained with blood. Blood was a sacred substance among the peoples of Mesoamerica and held in great reverence, so that the warriors probably would have been very proud of their blood-stained swords. In the Book of Mormon, the anti-Nephi Lehis had their swords stained with blood, and as a sign of their conversion to the gospel, they buried these blood-stained swords deep in the earth.
They're so serious about having repented of their sins that they actually take their weapons and they bury them up in the earth, and they make a covenant that they will never take them up again.
It was a tradition in Mesoamerica to place offerings deep in the earth in this manner.
This is going to be a witness to God that we have not stained our swords again, that we have not returned to our sins.
There's many types of armor described in the Book of Mormon. There's head plates, breastplates, arm plates, and you can see these reflected in some of the Mesoamerican art, especially the Maya art.
One of the things that Captain Moroni does is innovate some defensive armor. And part of that defensive armor is a shield, its upper body protection.
The lower legs are a difficult part of the body to protect with armor. And the reason being that in order to have flexibility in the knees, you've got to have an opening or a gap.
Helaman stripling warriors would have had some kind of a defensive armor on and would likely not have been injured in a place that was fatal, but they would have certainly lost blood from injuries that they would have on the arms and legs.
If you look at Mesoamerican martial art, it's quite clear that the Mesoamericans also didn't have any armor from the knee down. So they preferred speed and mobility to protection. Therefore, they didn't protect the lower legs, but that made them vulnerable.
Captain Moroni is one of the great heroes in the Book of Mormon. Obviously, Mormon felt the same way. He goes on and on about how if all men could be like Moroni, the powers of evil would be shaken.
Captain Moroni has to be one of those leaders that comes along every once in a while who's just absolutely full of charisma.
How many young women are there in the world that are waiting for Captain Moroni? If all men could be like Captain Moroni.
They don't come along very often. There are a lot of imitators. But Captain Moroni is just a natural and passionate leader, force for good in the Book of Mormon.
Captain Moroni is, of course, the most famous commander in the Book of Mormon and is renowned for his courage and his military skills, but also for his spirituality.
He's got foresight, he's righteous, he is willing to rely on prophets, he listens to the voice of the Spirit. He's the consummate righteous general, righteous commander. He's the kind of person you want to follow and people would follow, no matter what.
He was a very adept, a rather brilliant general. He was an innovator. He was willing to try new tactics. He was very good at what he did. Yet it says he did not delight in the shedding of blood.
There's a good lesson to be learned from Moroni, which is to be righteous is tremendous. To be righteous and skillful means you can make a real contribution to society and to the kingdom.
It's probably that title of liberty, though, with Captain Moroni, that is so remarkable to me. It is so simple, it is so succinct, but it's so powerful. Years later, under Mormon, the people would have a list of causes that they would fight for. Their wives and their families and their houses and their homes. Captain Moroni wrote on that title of liberty in memory of our God, our religion, our families. God was first. And he teaches me that if you put God first, everything else will fall into its proper place.
There's nothing that a mother resonates to more than the story of the 2,000 stripling warriors.
The stripling warriors talk about the faith of their mothers. But I don't see mothers or fathers, for that matter, sitting down and talking to them in a nice, defined lesson about faith.
It's what we hope for all of our children, that they will somehow learn faith from us.
That kind of faith can only be truly instilled, I believe, by the way a person lives.
It's important to tell them. Of course, it's important to use words and to explain and to give them an opportunity to talk. But none of that is as important as who you are. And those mothers were individually and undeniably righteous.
And when we look at the parents of the stripling warriors, they talk about making a covenant.
They were part of the people who had covenanted to bury their weapons and never fight again as they repented and came unto Christ.
They had such remarkable faith, these young men, that Helaman is strengthened by them. And I think, again, that tells you just how strong those teachings were, that not only does it affect those that directly receive them, but through their actions, the young men's actions, they influence a great church and military leader. It's living the covenant, not just talking about faith, that made the difference.
They're infused with testimony. They're infused with loyalty to the Lord in ways that you and I see from time to time. But there were 2,000 of them.
Helaman called them his sons. Just using those words, I think, help you to see the context in which they had lived, that he would refer to them as his sons rather than his warriors.
There is no substitute for a righteous mother, and no end to the influence that a righteous mother will have not only on her immediate posterity, but generations and generations following.
They fought the largest army of the Lamanites and frightened them into surrender. First thing Helaman does is go to count the dead in his army of stripling warriors, and there weren't any. And the boys explained to Helaman, our mothers promised us if we were faithful, we would be saved.
One of the principles that the 2,000 stripling warriors learned from their mothers is that we should not take counsel from our fears.
Second battle, the same thing happens. Helaman rushes out to count the dead. And there's a good many that should have been dead, but for their mothers.
The account of the disaster in 3rd Nephi is very interesting in a number of ways. It sounds like a hurricane or a large earthquake or maybe a combination of those kinds of things. But as you read through the account, there's so many little details that make it apparent that what they are talking about is a large explosive volcanic eruption.
Mesoamerica is a land of volcanoes. It is one of the most active volcanic areas of the world.
The shaking in the Book of Mormon lasted for 3 hours. That's not typical of a big earthquake, but it's very typical for one of these kinds of explosive volcanic eruptions. If you're in a massive earthquake, the biggest one in historic times was the Alaska earthquake, and that one lasted for about 3 to 4 minutes. In the biggest earthquake we've recorded. It often has magma and rock plugging up the volcano to some extent, and it takes a while for that material to be cleared out. This may take several hours. In the eruption of Mount Tambora in 1850, one single eruption, about 100 times the size of the Mount St. Helens eruption, severely affected an area of 1,000 miles in circumference. One of the points made in the 3rd Nephi account is that the whole face of the land was changed. And there is no other natural event, no hurricane, no earthquake, nothing that will rearrange a landscape like a volcano. The blast produced by this initial pulse produces winds in excess of 300 miles an hour. And these winds can cause enormous damage. Another thing that is produced with all this ash being put up into the atmosphere is that the ash and molecules of the air rub against one another and produce a lot of static electricity. The static electricity creates phenomenal lightning such as you have never seen before. Some of the lightning comes in ball form.
Lightning is one of the things that's happening during these volcanic eruptions coming down, and even balls of lightning coming down that can literally bounce along the ground. More than likely, people were killed by some of this.
You can imagine the state of mind for those who find themselves still alive.
The ash is so thick in the air that it simply blocks out the sunlight.
And then we have this darkness that goes on for 3 days.
And many people describe this darkness that's produced by the ash as so impenetrable that they cannot see their hand when held directly in front of their face.
And during the darkness, a voice comes. Announcing, I am Jesus Christ. And then silence. It was so powerful. It was so powerful that silence ensued.
They were of a different mindset, a different order of thinking. And it wasn't until about 200 AD, 170 years roughly from the time of the crucifixion, when ambitious people started to seek power again.
Ultimately, though, humans being what they are, human nature reasserted itself.
And people began to compete more, and they began to take pride in fine clothing and in jewelry and in their churches. Then there would have been more conflict, more need for government.
When they began to want more than someone else had, or to be jealous, to covet, all those things that Christ has taught us are outside of his kingdom, then they moved outside of his kingdom.
Why do we think that success comes in column inches written about us in history books or the newspaper, or how well known our name is, rather than what we do day in and day out in keeping covenants that has, I would say, a far greater influence for good throughout a society?
And from that moment on, things begin to come unraveled. And people, instead of seeing themselves as a whole society, which the Savior has healed, now begin to pull off into clans and tribes and identifiable families and so on.
That's when they broke into classes and began to manifest their wealth. And from that time on, they did not really have the same peaceful characteristics. And then the wars start, and that's a logical follow-up to the idea, I want more.
It seems that once it starts, it goes very quickly and without any skids whatsoever. It's a decided choice to go contrary. And that's what makes it the most tragic.
That happened to their society in the same way it happens in our individual lives, just one choice at a time.
Their egos rise to the fore, and eventually they were right back where societies typically are: strife and struggle and warfare and brutality and jealousy and immorality and pride.
Something we can observe in the clothes of the Mayans from the representation of the nobles is that they have big egos, that they have great pride, showing all their jewelry, their gods, their images, and their buildings in an illusory way come to show their ego, their pride, and all the riches that they possess.
With pride running rampant, then they turn to competing against one another, and the competition then leads to warfare, and the warfare leads to destruction.
The Nephites and the Lamanites, you would have thought they could have divided up the land, but they were not, either one, ready to give up. You recall that under Mormon, the Nephites thought they were so big and so powerful that at one point they attacked the Lamanites and drove them back into the land of Nephi, because they thought, we can win it all back. And then the next wave of the Lamanites just put them back in the hole they'd been in. But neither of them thought they were going to lose.
Mormon is amazing. We meet him when he's 10 years old, sober and quick to observe.
He's never seen a righteous society. He's never experienced that kind of thing. He's long after the days of righteous Nephites, and most of what he sees is evil.
Like many other prophets, Mormon is called by the Lord in his youth, in his extreme youth,
when he's about 15, I believe, he says that he sees the Lord and that he tasted and knew of the goodness of Jesus. That's an amazing sentence to utter, and must have been what allowed him to be continually renewed in his hope for these people.
Mormon faced, in some ways, a similar situation, but much more terrible situation than Moroni faced. And that is fundamentally, first of all, that the people that he was trying to save refused to be saved. That is what the essence of what they needed to do to alleviate their military problems was social reform and spiritual reform within the community, and the people refused to do that.
Mormon talks about one great revolution throughout the land.
Around 350 AD, something big happened in the state of Chiapas, in the Central Depression of Chiapas, which some of us identify with the land of Zarahemla. There was an almost wholesale abandonment of the archaeological sites and cities at that point.
Where did the people go? Well, the Book of Mormon, Nephites are being driven out. They're being driven northward.
Where over the next 40 or 50 years, they were forced to fight for their lives.
At one point in time, Mormon has a narrative that specifically describes the place that people are going to in the north. And he says that this place is north of the Nephite lands, that it has to be a land of many waters, it has to have cement buildings, and it has to be devoid of trees. And at the time that Mormon was living, all of those descriptions fit Teotihuacan exactly.
There is evidence from the iconography and the archaeology that some of the important cities in the southern portion of the Yucatan Peninsula, such as Tikal, were actually conquered by people coming in from Teotihuacan. There's evidence that this happened around 378 AD, which is an interesting date in terms of the Book of Mormon, because that's just a few years before the Battle of Cumorah.
In 378 AD, in Tikal, there is an entrada, or an entrance, where somebody from Teotihuacan apparently shows up, which is kind of a euphemism for either being conquered or being a political ally or a political puppet of Teotihuacan.
The Nephites, being where they were in the way.
The Nephites are sitting right between the trade routes of Teotihuacan and the Maya in the south. So it wouldn't be surprising at all that they were not only a target, but that these increasing wars, being influenced by Teotihuacan, are the kinds of things that lead to the annihilation of the Nephites.
And so they had to be eliminated in order to open up this area for the foreigners who were coming in to conquer.
It's interesting that also at this period of time, Mormon talks about a change in the nature of warfare. All of a sudden, he's complaining that war isn't following the rules that it used to follow. And it's very interesting that right at the time that Mesoamerican peoples are seeing a change in the nature of their warfare, that Mormon should be complaining about it in the Book of Mormon.
Mormon talks about some of the terrible things that are going on, even among his own people, as they're adopting torture, cannibalism.
There appears to be more destruction that comes along with these wars that come from Teotihuacan. The tactics appear to change.
Near Tikal, at a place called Rio Azul, you actually have monuments that portray the torture of captives.
That's very manifest in the 4th century. That's between 300 AD and 400 AD. At that time, throughout southern Mesoamerica especially,
in general, what happens with warfare is that it appears to become much more bloody, much more vicious.
The Lamanites are clearly trying to obliterate the Nephites as a cultural identity, either by getting them to assimilate or by completely destroying them so that there are no longer Nephites.
So, competition, rivalry, conflict, ultimately genocide. The only way to end the thing is to get rid of those other guys. And the Lamanites were more in number than the Nephites. So that's what happened.
Mormon's greatness is manifest by the fact that he was able to forestall the ultimate and inevitable doom for as long as he did.
He must have been a legendary figure for his accomplishments in the first 40 or 50 years, because they fought on and on for a long time. He spent his whole life as a soldier, from 15 years of age until he died.
In the end, when he finally knows it's over, he doesn't despair because he has us. And I think God never despairs. That is a godlike characteristic. We know he's filled with the love of God because of that.
Mormon was an absolutely wonderful writer and a wonderful editor. He created the longest consistent scriptural story that we have from the ancient world. It is the longest piece of literature that we have of any culture that is giving us the picture of a single man looking at his religion and telling us what he thought was most important about it.
He turns his great heart and his great skill to us as he concludes his abridgment and then writes to us, whom he knows will benefit from this record. It's so persuasive.
All of the stories that he includes and all of the choices that he makes are specifically to show to us that Jesus is the Christ.
Mormon is remarkable to me because he shows that no matter how wicked the world is around us, you can still keep covenants. You can still remain above that fray and be a tremendous influence for good.
And as he describes to Moroni, that he's lost hope now, that they have become totally depraved, that they do evil all the time and no good at all, and says to him, I cannot even recommend them to God any longer. And in all of that, the sweetness of the man to reach out to his son and say, in the next breath in this letter, but I can recommend you to God.
You see the tender relationship as Moroni includes in his record keeping so many of the sermons and epistles of his father. Much of Moroni's record he devotes to Mormon's words.
We see this little family and this oasis in the midst of all this filth. And is a great challenge as well as inspiration to us to say that we do not have any reason to say it is impossible, we can't do it. We can look to Mormon as an example of remaining faithful in challenging times.
They just have each other and they know that they have the Lord. I think if there's one message, particularly when Moroni wanders alone for all of those years, when he finally says, I am alone, one of the messages certainly is, 1 plus God is enough.
There are many, many more sites that are left unexplored. Other sites that we used to think were small, now they've mapped them, and all of a sudden they're much larger than we thought, and weren't just a village, were actually more along the lines of a city. So much more needs to be explored before we can rule out or confirm that Mesoamerica is the actual Book of Mormon setting. But so far from the study that I've seen, a lot of the comparisons look very good.
Out of the 200,000 sites that we have in Mesoamerica and in Mexico in general, I estimate that 300 have been investigated.
I don't look to archaeology to prove the Book of Mormon or the Bible or any of the other scriptures.
Scholars debate, they argue, they present theories, they shoot down theories. And so anyone who pins a testimony on scholarly evidences will find himself or herself in a state of constant flux.
I actually think the archaeology would be more useful as an aid to testimony for those who are already believers.
We all have the right to believe what we want, but we haven't been able to find proof yet that yes, it is true, or archaeological proof that what it says in the Book of the Mormons didn't exist.
That's not to say that there isn't powerful evidence for the Book of Mormon, but the most powerful evidence for the Book of Mormon is what it has always been and will always be, and that's the voice of the Spirit that testifies to you that this book is true, that these events really occurred, and that this book means something to you personally.